Good morning, everybody. My name's Heidi Baskfield. I'm the Executive Director of Advocacy here at Children's Hospital Colorado, and it is my huge pleasure to welcome you all here this morning for another awesome panel event. We really want to thank our partners, Epic, for allowing us to be the host site again this year for a wonderful discussion. We continue to be interested in how all of us are working collectively to do more and better in the space of family-friendly business practices. And it's actually a great pleasure for me to introduce our keynote speaker, Kim Burgess, who's the state's Chief Human Resource Officer. I have been on the receiving end of Kim's talent when I used to work with her over at the Department of Natural Resources. And so she has a lot to offer us this morning by way of experience and expertise. And so please join me in welcoming Kim.
I hadn't seen Heidi in a long time, and I said, you're still really tall. So I'll have to adjust the microphone. Please let me know if you can't hear. Can you hear me in the back of the room? Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Heidi, and the folks at the foundation for asking me to be here this morning. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, not simply because I'm a woman, because I've been a working mother, but because I'm responsible for, frankly, the work lives, and the health of about 95,000 state employees. And this is something that we've been working with and thinking about for a very long time, but the challenge is getting greater, I think, with every day. The state's workforce is the second largest in the state of Colorado, depending on which day you count. I think we kind of go back and forth. But we have in our workforce everything from nurses to wildlife biologists to highway maintenance workers to hatchery technicians. So we've got this incredibly diverse group of jobs that have very, very different requirements, right, for what these people have to do, what they're accountable for every day. Geography plays a huge role for us. We have individuals that work for the state that are in very small rural towns, and they may be the only person representing a state agency for 50 miles, right? So you think about the accountability and the demands on that person potentially to be on call at any time. So that creates a dynamic for those individuals and dealing with their life issues that's very different than folks that may be in the metro area working behind a desk. Not to downplay that, because that has its own set of challenges. The third thing that is huge for the state is, and this is true with any large employer, is the diversity in age. So the average age, or the median age in state government is 47 years old. But we have upwards of 25% of our workforce that's eligible to retire. And we've also got a huge influx of younger employees coming into our workforce. All of these different age groups have very different expectations about how to manage their lives. And I want to say, before I go on, I was excited to see that the title of this forum was Work-Life Integration. We used to use the term work-life balance. And I don't know about you all, but there is no balancing, right? We have lives, and those lives include work. They include families. They include relationships. They include interests. They include all kinds of things. So this is really about managing our lives, and as employers, helping our employees manage their lives in a way that makes them productive in the work that they do, happier and healthier. There was a fairly recent Harvard Business School survey of working professionals, and about 95% of the survey respondents said they worked in excess of 50 hours a week. And more than half of the respondents said they worked more than 65 hours a week. So raise your hand if you feel their pain, right? Okay, so again, we're not talking about any sort of balance here, right? We're talking about, I have a job, hopefully you love that job, I have a family, I have my personal interests, I have my health. How do I work through all those things? And how do I work with my employer to make sure that how I do my work is as conducive as possible to me being productive in every aspect of my life, right? Not just my job. The tricky thing about this too is that what it means to have an integrated work-life situation is very different for different people. Again, I talked about age groups, and there are very different expectations and needs depending on the age of your employees. But it's a very personal thing too. I can speak from my own experience. When my kids were young, this concept was just starting to get legs. And employers were starting to realize that there were, especially with so many women entering the workforce, right? I'm really old, by the way. They realized that they needed to start really thinking about how they could tailor the work and tailor schedules to allow parents to parent, right? I had 2 young children. My husband was in paralegal school at the time, and I had a job that required about 55 hours a week. He decided to stay at home with our youngest for a couple of days a week, and I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could be at home on the other 2 days, and that way we wouldn't have to put our daughter in daycare, right? So there's this fiscal impact, trying to manage salaries as you're a developing professional, and would that work? And I went to my manager at the time, and fortunately for me, it was a person who was progressive, frankly, in that area, and he said, you know what? I've never done this before. I'm not sure I'm going to like it, but let's give it a shot. So for me, I was incredibly lucky that I had someone who was at least willing to think about and try some different options for me as an employee. And I have to say, I have been blessed with an incredible career in state government. I've done a wide variety of things. Heidi and I both worked on wildlife policy for years, and here I am in HR. Go figure, right? I guess wildlife and HR are sort of the same thing. So I have personal experience, obviously, benefiting from these tools. In the state of Colorado, we do an employee engagement survey every other year. And we just started this about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's a wonderful tool. I hope all of you take advantage of something like that to really learn about what it is that helps your employees engage in the work that they do and with you as an employer. And one of the things that we hear consistently is the majority of our employees say that one of the things that they need and one of the things that they like about working for the state is having a supervisor who is willing to be flexible, right, with the things that they're trying to balance in their life. Obviously, relationships with supervisors is a driving force for, it doesn't matter what survey you look at. If you look at why employees are leaving jobs, typically, it's because of the relationship that they have with their supervisor. And this is just one piece of that. Will my supervisor work with me to try to work around so that I can be as productive as possible when I'm working in my job? So years ago, the state developed a policy on work life, on family, and it included things like job design, encouraging state agencies and managers within state agencies to think about how they were designing jobs. For example, would it be possible for 2 individuals to share a position, right? Because maybe you don't have a part-time job, you have a single job, but in order to accommodate the life changes of a particular employee, would it be possible to design that job so that 2 people could share it, right? That was really innovative at the time that came out. It's not always easy to do. It's hard to really even get your mind around as a manager. But that was one of the creative ways that we wanted managers to think about. Obviously, work hours, our leave policies, making sure that our leave policies acknowledged the different types of things that we have to address in our lives, taking care of elder parents, right? Doctor's appointments and tests and all of those things. At the same time, taking care of young children and school events and sports, right? The sports, I loved it, but they about killed me, right? You've got 4 different sports going on at the same time. So leave policies are critical. And the last thing that the policy addressed, and this is still so true today, is environment, right? So we have to create an environment. We knew that we had to create an environment where managers and employees were accepting, they were receptive, right, to these flexible work arrangements, flexible schedules, flexible job design. Because if you're an employee who decides to pursue one of these tools, right, and you get authorization to telecommute, but your coworkers don't get it, right, that creates huge issues. It creates huge issues for you as an employee. It creates issues for your team. Your team doesn't function as well as it could, and obviously managers struggle with how to manage the expectations of individuals that don't necessarily buy into this idea that we need to be flexible to help each other be productive. That's huge, and I think regardless of what tools you have in your toolbox, if you as an organization haven't created that mindset and that receptive environment, you will struggle to accommodate the needs of your employees, without a doubt. So I've mentioned a couple of things that I want to highlight again in terms of the tools. There's been a lot of work done on different people in the workforce. So depending on age, age has a lot to do with it. Time in certain careers has a lot to do with it. And it talks about the need for autonomy. What drives a lot of employees to be engaged in the work that they do is different types of autonomy. One of them is autonomy in decision making, right? I want you to believe in me. I want you to believe that I have the expertise to do this job, do it well, and make decisions without having to have them reviewed by several layers of management above me. But the other two places where it's critical are spatial autonomy. Give me my space, right? Let me work where I'm the most productive. How many of you have had meetings in Starbucks? Yeah, right, okay. There you go. There you go, right? And that's huge for us. That is absolutely huge for us to be able to transition from a traditional work setting into Starbucks and be just as productive, if not more, than you would be if you had been sitting in that office, right? That is huge for our workforce today. And again, it doesn't matter how old you are, it doesn't matter what you're used to doing, you need that autonomy to move around and work where you can, right? The other one is related to time. So this goes to your flexible schedules. Having employees, and there's all those crazy laws, you know, that like govern overtime and stuff like that. You kind of have to pay attention to those. But in general, your ability as an employer to let people work when they can and choose those hours in the day that are the most productive for your customer base, right? And that may be very different depending on the job. Again, I'll use myself as an example. I got this crazy idea because I started getting all this gray hair, and I thought, you know what, I probably ought to think about what I want to do when I retire. So I'm building this house out in the middle of nowhere. You wouldn't know where it's still in Colorado, but it's out in the middle of nowhere. It takes me about 2 hours one way to get from where I'm building this house into downtown. Okay, well, that puts a little bit of a cramp in your style when you're thinking, okay, I'm going to get to work and I'm going to be there by 8, and I'm going to work till 5 or 6 like I used to do. It just simply doesn't work. So fortunately for me, I have a manager who understands that. I know what the key times are that I need to be available face-to-face with my employees, with my customers, and I juggle that schedule every single day. So there are days that I'm actually on the phone at my house at 6 in the morning, at 7 in the morning, doing emails, doing whatever, and then I'm in the office for 6 hours, and then I'm out somewhere else. I'm in my car, I'm whatever. And that's been huge for me, right? Because that's allowing me to balance, in air quotes, all the things that are going on in my life right now, right? Again, I have a manager who says, I know you're incredibly productive if I let you work your schedule so that it really does fit your life, and we're doing great things, I think. in the state. So just an example, a personal example. The state is a different organization. How many of you work for government? Anybody? Okay, great. So it's, we don't have a bottom line that's a profit line, right? We don't have that. And when you think about these things as an employer, you think about how am I going to make my employees as productive as I can so that I increase my bottom line, right? That's the reality. That's what it's about. That's okay. At the state, we don't have that. What we do have, though, is we do have service. We have service to the citizens of this state in many different ways. As I said, we have nurses, we have biologists, we have highway maintenance folks. And our goal is to make sure that they are as productive in that service as they can possibly be. And as the state's chief HR officer, that's what I have to be focused on, right? I have to be focused on creating the tools to allow managers to make the environment one that our employees are as productive as they can be. But I want more than that, right? I want the people that work for the state to love working for the state and to be happy, right? To have happy lives. And if these are things that we can do for state employees to increase where they are on that general happiness scale, as corny as that sounds, I want to use them. And I want to make those available to the thousands of managers across state government. So we're working on those things. Every day, we're working with agencies to change how they're operating, to enhance some of the things that they're doing, their policies and the tools that they have available to their managers, to make sure that we are going as far as we can to achieving that goal of productivity, but also, making our employees as healthy and as happy as we can be. So with that, I think I will end my remarks. Thank you all again for asking me to be here. Thank you for the work that all of you do. I see several faces that look familiar, but I could never tell you in a million years where I saw you. So thank you.
Thank you, Kim. I'm David Shapiro, happy to be a co-host of this event with Children's Hospital Colorado. I work at EPIC, which stands for Executives Partnering to Invest in Children. Hopefully know almost all of you in this room, and I'm glad you could all join us today. We're going to introduce the panelists. I didn't realize the state had 95,000 employees. I usually say 30,000 plus, but now I can up sort of that number in our talking point. So that's was really important to hear, and that's a big number. So thank you for all of you that work in state government and for the work you do and the service that you do for all of us as taxpayers. Last year we had the Major General Michael Edwards as our keynote speaker, who is another member of the cabinet for the governor. And the takeaway I had from his comment in his keynote last year was recruit the soldier, retain the family. That was the talking point that I sort of used for the next few months that the Department of Defense and the Colorado National Guard was talking about in this work. And I think what I'll take away is you saying how you want happy employees, and that the happiness scale and the happiness factor of employees really does contribute to having more productive and just a healthier workforce for our state. So the happiness scale will be something on my mind as we move forward as well. I want to introduce our first panelist, which is Nina Currigan from KPMG. One thing we don't know necessarily is how many employees are at KPMG. If you could just give us a ballpark idea of how many people we're talking about in KPMG for the size of the firm, either in Colorado or broader. But Nina's going to talk to us a little bit about her own personal experience at KPMG, and just thank you for being here.
Thank you very much. Well, I work for KPMG. We're an international public accounting firm specializing in audit, tax, and advisory services. I think internationally we have over 100,000. In the U.S., maybe 25,000 employees. And here in Colorado, about 700 employees. So I've been with KPMG for 13 years. I had my first baby in 2014 and my second baby in 2016. So I'll be talking a little bit about my experience going through that. I would say that between 2014 and 16, KPMG really upped their maternity benefits, so I'll more be focusing on my second child with the firm. But I will say that when I came back from maternity leave in 2014, one of the things that impressed me the most was HR scheduled a call with a bunch of working mothers that had recently returned from maternity leave, just to understand our experience, what we thought worked well, what we would like to see different. And some of our feedback actually got implemented into our new maternity leave program that went into effect in 2015. So some of the things I'd like to highlight are an amazing lactation program. The firm provided hospital-grade pumps to new mothers, a lactation consultant or nurse, even shipping kits. So when I came back from work in 2014, I was traveling about 25 to 30% of the time and still breastfeeding and a pumping mother. And I would pack my milk on ice and bring it on the plane. And it's a lot of work. So the fact that the firm provided shipping kits at no cost to me to ship back every single day while I was traveling after my second child was a huge benefit. Up to 4 months at full pay, which was pretty amazing. It's something I realized that only large companies can do, but it's not always about, the pay benefits. It's things like soliciting your ideas. I didn't take advantage of this, but we have an amazing alternative work arrangement program. So one of my counselees also had a baby recently. She came back in February from maternity leave, and she was back for a week and said, you know what, I can't do this. I'm not ready to come back full time. It's too hard. So we worked with her to come up with an alternative work arrangement that was a staggered return to work. So she came back. We put a plan in place where she would come back at 50% of the time, or 50% of her work week for the first 2 months, and then she staggered up to 65%, 75%, and I think she'll be back at 100%, maybe 8 months back from maternity leave. Our alternative work arrangements are really anything that you can dream up. It can be flex time, where your work hours are different than normal. It could be reduced time. It could be shared jobs, telecommuting. So it's really anything that you can dream up. KPMG is pretty willing to accommodate. And finally, the last benefit that I think is really amazing is a backup care program. So KPMG recognizes that childcare plans break down approximately 6 to 8 times a year, whether it's a sick child that can't go to daycare, or a sick nanny that can't come to work, or a nanny that wants to take vacation. So KPMG offers through Bright Horizons 15 days a year of emergency backup care where you pay a very small amount. It's like $35 a day, up to 10 hours a day for either in-center or in-home backup care. I took advantage of that a lot with the first child. I've already used 2 days with my second child. You can use it on the weekends, during work. It's just a really amazing thing knowing that you can, when plans break down, have an option to go to and still meet your work demands. So that's been my experience. KPMG is a great place to work for. They really value, their employees, and I think that they see the value in retaining good employees. I was with KPMG for 10, 11 years before I had my first child, and they don't want to lose someone they've invested that much in just because they can't accommodate, flexible work arrangements.
Thank you, Nina. We will have an opportunity for some questions of our panelists when we get through with the panel as well for all of you. We've spoken with KPMG and with some of the folks at HR there about some of these comprehensive benefit packages. I think what we'll find is that a lot of the work that's being done in more forward-thinking organizations does stem out of breastfeeding and lactation work in terms of supporting breastfeeding moms. We're always trying to complicate the word family to include every sort of arrangement that you can have, because not everyone is necessarily with children or whatever the family situation looks like. But when we're talking about the childcare needs of supporting new moms or specifically recruiting millennial women into the workforce, packages like the Limerick provider that does storage of breastfeeding and mails them back, or Bright Horizons or Care.com, there are lots of third-party providers that are working on these issues and helping businesses support the transition back into work. So thank you, Nina, for describing your experience. We're going to move on to Pamela Hardy, who's with DaVita, and Pamela is in their global head of diversity and inclusion. And thank you for joining us. If you don't mind also just giving us a snippet of how large DaVita is, both locally or globally, in terms of employees, we'd appreciate just hearing that as well.
Sure. So good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. I am with DaVita, and we have over 70,000 plus employees of which 2,000 plus employees are here in the Colorado area, and we are obviously fast growing in Colorado and beyond.
Great, thank you. And if you want to just explain to us a little bit about how DaVita helps and supports employees and what family-friendly means at DaVita, we'd certainly appreciate it.
Absolutely. So I'm going to piggyback on Kim and some of the highlights that she shared. One of the unique sort of stance that we're taking at DaVita around this notion of family-friendly is really the whole definition of what family is. And David, you alluded to this a few minutes ago, but we have a very diverse set of individuals within our workforce. 3/4 of our workforce self-identify as female. We also have 3/4 of a workforce that self-identify either as Gen X and millennials. So the majority of our workforce obviously support and represent those two generational brackets. I say all that to say that it really reaffirms what I think Kim shared earlier, which is how individuals are defining family is different than how it was defined 5 and even 10 years ago. And it's quickly changing. And so we are really looking at it from an aspect of what are the needs of individuals who are single parents. We have quite a few single parents. And in fact, we have quite a few men who are single parents, which is also very interesting. We also are exploring this notion of caregivers, really, and for those individuals who are caring for other family members. And interestingly enough, there was some interesting statistics in Harvard Business Review that says that 68% of millennials over the course of the next 5 years are guaranteed to be caregivers. So we're really exploring this notion of the family structure and how we support, whether you're single, whether you're in a same-sex marriage or partnership, whether you are going through gender transition, and obviously see that and view that as family structure, or if you're single or in a what we call traditional family structure. And so we're really looking at it from a gambit. We've spent a lot of time really connecting and learning from our teammates to really understand what their needs are, and encourage you that if nothing else that you do, to really look for ways to connect, to learn, to not assume, and to check in regularly to understand how those needs are constantly evolving and how those needs are constantly changing. And so we're really, really thinking about it in the perspective of policy, leadership behavior, and accountability. And those are sort of the 3 lanes that we're looking at, because you can have the greatest policies, but as Kim alluded earlier, happiness really lies in your day-to-day interactions that you have with your leaders. And so how do you ensure that those leaders are employing the right behaviors to support and to provide the right tools for that individual to be happy? And then the third is just really around accountability. We really have started to, I would say, disrupt at our leadership core to really have the conversation that, hey, this is what's happening, this is what we're hearing, and these are some recommendations. And I would encourage you to really think about how do you engage your leaders in a very meaningful way, because oftentimes leaders have the 90-foot view, but then there's always the 60, there's always the 50, and there's always the 40. So we're really looking at it from all 3 levels.
Thank you, Pam. I think that's really an important point. When we had our pre-surveys, and I'll mention surveys again before we close today, there were several comments that came across that were talking about how to speak to leaders and how important it is to bring this conversation up. We have always said that having a champion in the C-suite or as a leader is very important to move anything forward. However, it seems like a lot of you are asking for more tools on speaking with leaders and leadership development around this topic as well. So this is the first year we've done these forums. This is the second sort of formal year of doing the forums, and this is the first year that we're getting feedback from everyone, both through the pre-survey and the surveys that are at your table that we'll ask you to fill out at the end of the breakfast. But it's clear that trickling these conversations up is something that needs some work from our standpoint and from a lot of us in the room as well. So look forward to us having some talking points and maybe engaging you in the work that you're doing on this speaking with leaders piece. Because if you don't have that champion in leadership, I think you need both ends. You need the message to be coming from the ground floor as well as from the top in order to have policies that work and that stick at companies. We're going to move to our final panelist, Mark Popenhagen from Turning the Corner. Mark, we've had some rather large employers represented on the panel, so it would be great if you could speak to us a little bit from a smaller business standpoint and with some of the businesses that you consult with in addition to Turning the Corner. Colorado is a small business state, and yet we have some very large businesses represented, so you get to be not only the other man up here and on the panel, but also a representative of small business as well. So thank you for joining us, and please...
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yes, the nice thing about going last is you kind of get some of the jitters out of the way, and you kind of hear what they're saying. The bad thing is they've said all the cool stuff at this point. So I will try not to make up too much as I go along. Turning the Corner is a smaller company. We only have 14 employees. When I started, I was the only man on the company of 10 women, which was an awesome experience for me. But what we do is our mantra externally is we want everyone to love their job. And that's from the job seeker trying to find the right company, and also on the management time teaching employers how to love their employees. And internally we say we want to end suffering in the workplace. That's truly our goal, is let's get rid of that and let's enjoy the world, because to echo everything that's being said, we spend so much time at work and with the people around us that if we're not engaged, we're never going to do our best. And I think if you pay attention to Gallup polls, you know, I'll go positive, 30% of people are really engaged at work. That's the positive accent. So 3 out of 10 of us in this room really love our job and work very hard every day at it. And that's cool. And we'll just leave it at that and let you do the math on your own. And so finding that balance between, and you're right, I like integration much better. I'm going to use that more, so please forgive me. Finding that way to integrate the two sides of your life together, along with the other sides that are outside your control, whether you have senior parents and young children and everything else that goes along, is what will not only make that portion of your company more successful, but the whole thing. I've come from corporate management. I was part of mergers and acquisitions team. I don't use words like FTE. I don't believe those little acronyms. I've never have. And what I have found is that it is very hard, especially as smaller companies, to put in these things to compete with larger companies, especially when you're dealing with leaders that quite frankly, I was a business owner, and I looked at the bottom line every day. And I knew that employee cost was not just their hourly wage. And that was scary to me. How do I keep my company afloat and make money and do all these other things? And it wasn't until we really sat down and had a talk with all our employees. I had like 30 part-time employees, and we said, what do you need? And it was that simple. And if we can start teaching that to the people around us and, you know, talking about managing people, we teach in our management training classes for executives, we don't manage people, we manage tasks. You have tasks that need to be done. You have work that needs to be done. And if we remember that the person that gets that job done is a person, and we encourage them and find their needs, it's much better. And it can be simple things. We know we have people running in late. I'm a single dad. I have flexibility. Whenever we talk to job seekers, number one is flexibility. All of them in their top 5. I need some sort of flexibility. I had 3 kids in 3 different schools. I had to pick up. I had to move them around. And yes, sports. I'm so glad they went into music, because that's at night. It was awesome. I have one that reads and draws, and I just hold on to her. This is awesome. But if we have that flexibility and work with the people around us, we can also show to the people above us that it works. And then in corporate management, that's one thing we did. We took a small team and allowed them to work the way they wanted to work, and we compared results. And we actually outperformed. And I think sometimes that's one tool you can use. So I don't want to go too far so we don't take too many questions. Just to say, you know, the well-being of the people around you is what makes a company successful. And I see it over and over again. I think, and knowing that's part of your family, whether it's any sort of configuration, will definitely help you out all the way through.
Thank you, Mark. You know, it's interesting as we get through the panel. I think we managed to get through everybody's presentation with only a brief mention of paid parental leave. And paid parental leave is often, or paid family leave, paid maternity leave, paid paternity leave is often sort of what a lot of folks think of when they think of family-friendly benefits and policies. But as we're hearing through this panel, and as we get more nuanced in our discussions with many of you that have been at all of these panels with me, or multiple presentations, it's a lot broader and a lot bigger than just a paid parental leave policy. That is an important piece of it, but it's only one piece. In the overarching presentation that EPIC gives at other conferences, flexibility is the #1 benefit, and we've heard that loud and clear again today. So how do we include the work flex and the flex time issue in our family-friendly conversations, and how do we relay to employees that flexibility in the workforce or in the workplace is actually a family-friendly benefit? It's not just about productivity and work flex, it's also part of this comprehensive conversation about family-friendly, so I appreciate that. The other thing we've heard loud and clear is this importance about communication, education, and training. In the assessment that I will also point you to that we released with the School of Public Health, we have a brief family-friendly assessment online. Communication, education, and training is its own section. So there's a section on core benefits, there's a section on supporting new parents, and there's a section on how these things are being communicated within your workforce. And I think oftentimes that may be half the battle, or a significant piece of the battle, is there's a lot of things going on, but not everybody knows that they're going on. In a small business, that might not be the case. Folks may be more interactive in terms of communication, but we've seen as the company size grows, the different channels of communication making things harder for everybody to access the benefits and be equitable at the same place. So we do have some time and opportunity for questions and answers, and we have a mic as well. Abby, do you want to maybe hold the mic for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
And please feel free to, I saw Laurel has a question there.
Good morning. I wonder how you measure the success of your programs. Are you looking at turnover, productivity, and in particular for the state of Colorado, how are you measuring the success of these programs you're putting in place?
I can just talk without that, I think. So, as I mentioned earlier, we conduct an employee engagement survey, and we've only been doing it for the last 5 or 6 years, but that's one of the key pieces of information. We've just recently sort of redesigned our exit questionnaire. It's one of those things where finding out why people are leaving after they're gone or as they're going out the door it's helpful, but that's not when you want to learn that. So we're using the employee engagement survey. We are using information from the exit questionnaire, but the other thing that we're working on developing right now is a stay interview. So we're hoping that conversation, that interviewers will provide us information about how effective these policies are.
Pam, do you have anything to add about how DaVita might be measuring?
Well, I was just going to say, one of the things that we are really challenging ourselves around and slightly disrupting is the whole notion of engagement. We also do an engagement survey as well. And so one of the things that we are really thinking through is, do we measure engagement, but do we really measure total fulfillment as it is defined today? And total fulfillment really is not just around our practices. It's not just around sentiments in terms of how you are being treated. It is really around the value and how you define value. So we're really starting to sort of turn it on its head to really think about that. We also, and I'm a big fan of surveys, but I think surveys give you sort of a point of a direction of where to go, almost like a stoplight. And so you're at the stoplight, but at the same token, at some point your car needs to move. We also employ quite a few methods of what we call town halls, that allow us to really capture sort of real-time feedback from our teammates in a real way. And that is our version of what we call Connect and Learns. So we do town halls at all different levels, all different sizes. Sometimes we do smaller groups. Sometimes we do groups that are very, very specific. We just did a small group town hall session with our visually impaired to really connect and learn from them. And we try to do those on an ongoing basis, again, with the notion that how people perceive things in terms of their everyday value can change. And so therefore, the opportunity to learn is always there.
It's interesting. I appreciate, Laurel, the comment, and I know that, you know, data and analytics and economic drivers are important in the work that you do and in the conversations we've had. And this is one of those areas where these questions come up more from the sort of more traditional nonprofit and government sector partners when we have these conversations, less so when we're dealing only with executives, actually. I think that this conversation about relating it to bottom line is very important because folks are looking at their bottom line and we need the data in order to understand that. But we also have to do some more work about figuring out what we're measuring and how we're measuring it. I've had this conversation with a few of you in the room recently about how we can really get to where we need to be in terms of promoting the benefit of doing some of this work. Is it only a bottom line benefit? Maybe, but maybe it's incorporating some of these things that we're talking about fulfillment. I mean, when I hear the words that you two are talking about, I think, and I'm only a very novice evaluator, gosh, that's really hard to measure. You know, I mean, how do you, you know, you can get some information from an engagement study, but if you're doing reporting for grants or you're doing, you know, inquiries of the federal government for various, you know, RFPs, having that information about fulfillment, that doesn't sound like a traditional data analytic measurement, and yet that's what the executives and the C-suite professionals are talking about. They're talking about happy employees. They're talking about engaged, you know, present, resilient workforce. And so what terms we use, I think will be something that we have to figure out over the course of the next few years. And I wish we could say, yes, your investment in a lactation program at X amount translates to Z benefit for your company. And even the folks that are selling the lactation programs themselves are struggling to provide that information as a sales tool. So to try and think about doing it from an evaluation standpoint from a third party, you know, or more non-biased perspective is also very difficult. So thank you for helping us through that. And I'm sure we'll have more questions about that because it's definitely on our minds in a needed category.
And David, I'll just add
Yes.
one point, and that is the other notion around data that is so critically important, because data is great, but sentiment is even that much greater. Because to hear the voices of employees really adds to it what we call a human connection. And so when you are having the conversations, not just with leaders, but in some cases either with the stockholders or with the public, that's really where your brand comes into play. And so there's lots of various different tools out there, like Glassdoor, where individuals can go in, Facebook, and post their sentiments about your organization or about you as a leader. Our roles as obviously leaders in our organizations is to manage that proactively to ensure that when those sentiments are out there, that they are in fact positive and truthful. And so that's the other piece of why you want to mix the data plus the sentiments together. It just adds that human face and allows you to really manage it in a way that says, if I were to go out tomorrow and someone were to ask me, how is my experience at DaVita? I'm not going to say something. I'm going to say something that's very positive and not something that is less.
And we hear that a lot in the small business community world as well, that sentiment and engagement in these conversations and perception is really important. I love having these panels because they're so different from the normal everyday meetings. If I think about the trajectory of me at Epic and some of the meetings we were having a comment like data is important, but sentiment, you know, is just as important, if not more. That's not something we hear every day in our world. And yet, when we hear from Mayor Hancock, like we did yesterday at the Gender Equity Summit or others, this sentiment piece about working and living in an environment that's supportive and happy and healthy is so important. I mean, it's really the key to driving all of this work. So I appreciate the comment, and I continue to learn more each time we have these panels. Marty, did you have something in the back there?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I work with David as a volunteer on Epic, and one thing we talk about a lot is to see how many companies are providing subsidized early childhood care, whether that be in partnership with a place like Bright Horizons, or someone like that, where I'm probably one of the few retirees in this group, okay? It's a passion of mine. And what bothers me is I see my kids now with their children and how they're struggling to pay for childcare, let's say the 0 to 5-year-olds. Are you seeing any kind of movement where fringe benefit programs would provide this as part of your cafeteria plan, for example?
Nina, or maybe Nina, you spoke to us a little bit about the
So
Bright
there's
Horizons.
15 days a year that are subsidized. That's what KPMG has currently. Those 15 backup days are subsidized.
Which is really important. And having an emergency or backup plan is something we talk about in our toolkit, and something that we've promoted with a lot of you around the room as one way to handle it. I know that there was some sick children and family issues that came up for some of our colleagues this morning, and having the support of something like Bright Horizons or care.com so you can get to important meetings and are able to do that is a really important lever that we can pull. Mark, have you guys given any thought, or do you have any comments about childcare and childcare supports?
Well, it's obviously always different with the size of your company as well. With larger companies, we did try to have a certain number of days that we did have child support for that position, or money-based, we could help them out. It gets a little harder when you get down to, I hate to use the word working poor, when people are really struggling and they're just barely making it meet. There's some good organizations like Work-Life Partnership is a great organization that helps people out in that lower level tier of employment. And then on the other hand, it's really setting the groundwork up early. Luckily, like we're very flexible in our work phase, so we know when people are coming in. We have one day that's core hours. Other than that, you can be in the office, you can be at home, that's up to you. And so we try to support each other very much. So hey, if you have to be home and work, be home and work. And maybe sometimes you can do that, and maybe sometimes you can't. But we've worked with a couple large companies that are starting to institute that a little bit more, work from home. It can't be an everyday thing, obviously, but it's something that can help out in those situations.
Kim, do you have any thoughts about childcare or subsidized childcare?
Yeah, actually, the approach that we've taken is we've negotiated discounts with certain providers. The unfortunate part about that is that, I mean, that's just such a small piece of that network. But that's the approach that we've taken, and we've had those discounts in place. I wish I can remember the numbers, but last year, I want to say we had something like state employees saved somewhere around $27,000 in total, that the employees that actually took advantage of those discounts. So obviously it has to be that you like that particular provider, but that's more the approach that we've taken.
And the other thing we've seen with some of those is availability, right? And so do they have room for my 6-week-old if I want to come back to, or need to come back to work full time? Oftentimes that becomes a challenge in those situations as well. Pam, is childcare anything that DaVita is looking into?
We are looking into it, and it is something that is sort of top of mind for us because, as I'm learning as a newcomer to Colorado, that childcare within the state of Colorado is quite competitive. And so that sort of creates a whole sort of separate, it's not just the pay piece, David, that you talked about, but it's obviously having your child enrolled and accepted into it, and there's space availability as well. But the other thing that we are also looking at, and again, this is where we are sort of really slightly probably taking a very disruptive approach, is I sort of challenged our leaders and said, look, we have a gym on site. We're a healthcare company. Yeah. We should probably have childcare on site. Yeah. Like that to me is like a table stake. Mm-hmm. And so we're really sort of really looking at that in a way that we haven't before, which I think is really going to challenge us to really think about it in the perspective of what role do we really want to play and how do we view ourselves in terms of being out in front in this.
Well, Marty, you heard sort of a full gamut perspective there, from emergency backup care situation to the plug for on-site childcare, which is something that Children's Hospital has here on campus and has a wait list, and so how accessible it is becomes an issue. One thing we want to make sure we do, and we've heard at a few presentations from other places outside the metro area, so realizing that we're maybe in a bit of a bubble here in the metro area compared to outside Colorado. A point that keeps coming up is making sure that the family-friendly conversation does not disenfranchise single childless employees as well. So when we talk about child care benefits, we want to do so in the context of dependent care in general, because a lot of folks are also dealing with elder care issues, or they're dealing with pet care issues that some third-party providers will help you. So it's broader and it's bigger than child care. And one way into the conversation is about how you're supporting the dependent care needs of all employees, not just the child care needs. As EPIC is an early childhood focused organization, we certainly want to be a part of that conversation, Pam, and if we can help with your disruptive conversations or be involved on the ground floor, we would love to work with you on that and find out how you're doing more. But dependent care is the issue. Children, employees with young children is sort of the subset in that, but understanding that it's part of a larger conversation is important as well. Do we have any other questions? Paige?
Hi, good morning. My question is around, through your surveys and through the discussions and connecting with your people, what are some of the additional family-friendly things that are on your radar? What are some other things that maybe you're not providing yet but are thinking about providing in the future, or that you're hearing from your people?
Who wants to field that one first?
If I was in HR.
I'll go. Well, I think that, and this is related, I think, to your leave policies, but one of the things is participation in your child's life. So everything from, teacher conferences to school activities, even participating in your child's classroom. We have types of leave that are specifically designed for that, but it's interesting because there's a dialogue that seems to recur in the General Assembly about whether or not that should be basically a mandate. And it's interesting to me because it's really gone back and forth. We had statutes on the books for years. They were pulled off. They were put back on, modified. They were pulled. So it's really interesting. So that's one of the things that we hear is, can we solidify that for the state so that I know that in order for me to actively and effectively participate in my child's school or whatever the case may be, can we make sure that that happens? The other thing is the paid family leave, honestly. That continues to be a significant debate in the General Assembly in Colorado about what that should look like. Obviously, the state has, we have, our employees are covered by family medical leave. We have fairly extensive paid leave. But if you are new to the state and you don't have significant leave balances, you're kind of in a bad place. So that's one of the other things that, we're continuing to explore is how to make that benefit appropriate and adequate for the whole variety of circumstances that might exist in the workforce.
I would just add two things. One, lots of conversations around pets. So that seems to be, I'm a pet owner, sorry. Just a friendly plug, single pet owner, just so that we're all clear. So lots of conversations around pets, lots of conversation around either same-sex partnerships, recognition around same-sex marriage, so time off for that, so leave around that. And also lots of conversation around elder care. And so I mentioned earlier about this notion of caregiver, lots of conversation around this whole piece around caregiving, and both the emotional as well as the financial support that can be offered around that. And my sense is that will only continue to really sort of expand.
So thank you for talking. For bringing up the policy pieces, and also once again speaking about dependent care issues in general. Some of the things that are coming out that are sort of newer, maybe. I think this whole conversation is in the innovative category, even though we're talking about things like on-site childcare that, around World War II was all more common than it is actually today. But there, so innovation in this category, what we have seen, some things that are coming down the pike and folks are interested in, are a written infants at work policy. Boulder County has a written policy that infants are okay at work up to age 1. And we've seen some other companies like that written infants at work policy and want to do some work around creating their own infants at work policy. So that's one of the newer conversations that's been coming up in this field. And then another one is anytime I hear about a bereavement policy, which most of you, if you look in your employee handbooks, there's usually a defined bereavement policy for most companies. I ask them if they're willing to equal whatever the bereavement time is with a bonding leave policy. So in my mind, this is on my own talking point. I don't know if this is going on in the other places, but when I hear the B word of bereavement, I'm wondering if bonding is another B word that could be added to a handbook, even if it's a week or 3 days. I know those of us in the room that are working in maternal health and child, a couple days or a week is not enough to do a bonding time. I completely understand that. However, you could start the conversation with, hey, we already have a written B policy, a bereavement policy. Would we consider adding a written bonding policy to our handbook as well, even if it is just in the beginning to mimic the amount of time that's on a bereavement leave? So those are some things that have come up that are not necessarily have been mentioned in our conversation yet today. We may have time for one more question if there are any.
Yeah, hi, and obviously hiring for cultural fit is important, but I'm curious about existing supervisors and managers that need some coaching or some training around some of this stuff. Is it about training? Have you put it into performance review? How have you handled kind of getting those people to flip over and sort of understand the benefit of caring for their direct reports?
Mark, you talked a little bit about coaching and communications. You want to?
Yeah, one of the things we have done, because again, we want employers to love employees, is we created a 12-week program. And it's 6 weeks actually, and that's our whole goal, is to start out with, hey, this is not a number. And I am I love numbers love me person, because I understand that's where I learn, but that's only, as you said, a small piece of the story. And we come in and we talk about more than just situational leadership and in EQ and how to have those difficult conversations and what their motivators are, and really encourage the managers to do that. And you're right, and most of us realize it. That's awesome unless you have buy-in from the top, right? And we get that. I get that. It's a battle we all fight. And so again, that's where we try to get them involved as much as possible and into the programs, attending the programs, so that managers can see the issues they're dealing with. Because a lot of times, as managers, we're dealing with what's coming down. This isn't getting done. You need to get this done. And we push that. And we don't mean to, and even in HR, you don't mean to, but you're dealing with, unfortunately, too many grievances and not enough people coming in saying, I just loved my day. This was the best day ever, and I want you to know that. That just very rarely happens. And so our goal is if we can teach managers how to handle that, then it will eventually start growing up. And again, talking to you, numbers. If we have a benchmark and we can show there's improvements and we can try to start applying where these programs started, it makes it a lot easier to sell it in a bigger arena as well.
Yeah, we actually just created a playbook. We just recently had 2 teammates go through gender transition, and I think you said it very eloquently. I think you have to lay out sort of a pathway and assume that not everyone is going to approach specific instances the same way. And so I think really finding ways to educate, create awareness, and to lay out what expectations should take place, I think is really, really, really critical. I mean, we did a gender transition playbook recently, and our leaders loved it. I mean, we had everything in there from a glossary in terms of, hey, this is what it means, regardless of what you believe, what you don't believe. This is what you can expect. From a teammate perspective, this is what you should expect from your leader. This is how you should engage. But I think that our employees need more access to resources and understanding around specific instances, with the notion that every instance is in the same and that we should never judge the whole for the one.
I like this idea, and maybe it'll build on our conversation about leadership, communication, and development, about having a training or a toolkit that's devised specifically to give the talking points to leaders. Because I think what happens is you get to a certain point in your career and you may be older or a little bit less connected, unless you maybe have grandchildren or children that are going through, of what the current cost of childcare is. I think we get a lot of aha moments when we simply relay what the current cost of childcare is for full-time childcare amongst C-suite executives, that they really didn't understand what the average cost of childcare is. And so having this sort of cheat sheet or glossary available, I think not only provides context to the work that we do in trying to define how important it is, but also it gives leaders, I'm sure they were very appreciative, because there's a lot of things going on in society, it's moving so quickly, that it gives them sort of some high-level talking points that they can feel more comfortable engaging in these conversations wherever they may be. And you know, gender equity and some of the work that we were involved in yesterday is a good example of that. What you're talking about is these are top-of-mind issues, but not everybody knows how to talk about them. We often have the tools in the room and all of this data and information, but how we get those key messages up to the folks that we want to, so they feel more comfortable having the conversations, is part of what the reason why Epic was started. We started that because we wanted business leaders to feel more comfortable talking about early childhood, birth to age 5, at cocktail parties, at conversations, at meetings, using childcare and the needs of employees with young children as a critical business decision for the state of Colorado. And we're still providing talking points, and as we all know, that field is rapidly developing. We went through the whole brain development piece and did trainings on that. We did a lot of trainings on return on investment and Heckman equation, and sort of if you invest now, the societal returns later. And now family friendly is sort of the next conversation that we're helping a lot of our executives out with in terms of understanding and having talking points. So we'd be happy to speak more with anybody that wants to put something like that together. So I want to thank our panelists for joining us today. Kim and Nina, Pam, and Mark, thank you for your expertise and joining us on the panel. I have a few other thank yous as well. All of the family-friendly Colorado work is supported from administration and financial support by the Essentials for Childhood Project at Colorado's Department of Public Health and Environment. So Georgiana Venetis, that can't be with us here today, and Shana Makuchi, thank you for the help that you give us. Evaluation is important, and getting the data about not only what we're doing, but from you is also important. So the School of Public Health here at the Anschutz campus is our evaluation partner, and Sarah Brandspiegel. A lot of you filled out the pre-survey prior to coming. As I finish my comments, I just want you to note the green piece of paper in the middle of the table. Please fill it out. It is two-sided, and leave it just on the table. We will collect it afterwards. We're getting some very important feedback about these forums, about what folks need for more resources, about how to engage you better. I should always put that plug when I'm completely done, because everybody always picks it up, which is what you want people to do. But I have a few more thank yous, which are Children's Hospital Colorado, Abby English-Waldbaum, and Brittany DeAcheval. Thank you for being our hosts and our partners in this work for multiple years in a row. You can find a lot of the assets and the collateral that we have at familyfriendlycolorado.com. We're just in the midst of building that out. So what is currently at familyfriendlycolorado.com is the digital version of the toolkit that is in front of you. This will be updated in 2017 as well. It has a lot of the tips and the talking points that our panelists mentioned today, as well as some other things. It's a pretty user-friendly guide. It's only 18 pages or so as it stands right now. It will probably grow a little bit. There's also an assessment online that you can link to at Family Friendly Colorado. I know that there's so many surveys out there about engagement and about how to assess the work you're doing. However, getting a baseline measurement is pretty important. And what we've devised is about a 15 to 20 minute tool that's specifically related to family-friendly workplace policies and practices. It's been vetted through all sorts of departments and advisors throughout the country, from Harvard to Stanford, so we're clear that it's not very biased and that it has the right type of questions in it, and it only takes about 15 minutes if you know the HR policies and benefits at your place of work. So we encourage you to take that assessment. There is going to be some recognitions and awards that are released, maybe a soft launch in 2017 and a bigger award recognition in the coming years. And then there's also a a toolkit on there that's specifically for kind of calculating the cost of the childcare needs of employees. That's a toolkit that Epic produced in 2010. So there's 3 assets that we're promoting on the familyfriendlycolorado.com website. I want to thank all of you for being a part of this work and for continuing the conversation and for moving the ball forward. And I look forward to the conversations that bubble up from this work. I'm accessible. I know our panelists may have a few moments as well if you want to individually introduce yourselves. We are going to hold a meeting of our work group after this. We're going to stay in this room for those of you that have been invited and are participating in that. There is an event coming up in August, August 17th. Our partner at HealthLinks is going to have their annual celebration of the healthiest place to work, and this year's focus is family friendly. And so there's a lot of energy around this conversation. So we encourage you to keep that work moving forward and to think about what next steps you need individually. And please think of Epic as a resource for helping you, even if it's just to brainstorm and popcorn ideas off of what could happen or what may be feasible or roadblocks that you're coming into. So thank you all for joining us today. Please look at the green form on your desk and fill it out, and for being a part of the work today. Thank you.